Alright, we find ourselves this morning in that weird Sunday between Christmas and New Year. Something's happened, we're still waiting for something else. What'd you do with it? Well, we thought, given everything we've walked through in 2020, and all of the unknowns about 2021, we'd grab some hope from the groaning that we hear in Romans chapter 8. Now, we've probably heard a lot of groaning, maybe done a lot of groaning in 2020. Lots of things have kind of produced that deep sound of pain, or the low creak of pain as pressures applied. Democracies creaking amid protests, or health services bursting at capacity, or businesses agonizingly closing their doors, or marriages strained in lockdown, or finances stretched in the downturn, or anxieties just mounting in the vulnerable, or lungs gasping on ventilators, or mental health skyrocketing into dark places. We've been groaning, and it's got louder as it mounts on each other. So lockdown number 1, it was like, ah. And lockdown 2 was like, ah. And then a lockdown kind of over Christmas, ah. Here's why we need these words from Romans 8. Because in Romans 8 you hear a lot of groaning, but it's a good groaning. The Apostle Paul says, because of Jesus, if you're a Christian, in the groaning you can plant hope. So that it's not just groaning about our present circumstances, but there's a good groaning that is a groaning for our future glory. Look at verse 18. Paul goes, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. He says, if you're a Christian, you need to do this hard work of considering in all the present suffering. Make a considered comparison between our present suffering and future glory. Now, he's a man with scars. He knows what it is to do this. And he's a man who follows Jesus. He says, in the suffering of the cross, it's the future glory of the resurrection that pulls you through. And he's saying for us to survive and endure and to persevere as a Christian, you need to take into your groaning of all the present suffering that we've lived through and are living in, and say that the cross and the resurrection of Jesus mean that although I groan as a Christian, I'm no longer just groaning about stuff, but I'm actually groaning for something better. So let me show you the hope that we're groaning for. Because actually creation is teaching us about it. Look at verse 19. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it. And here's the words, in hope. That the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. So Paul acknowledges creation's groaning. The sound that comes out of Romans 8 is a deep growl of a groan. Humanity's rebellion has knocked creation of its access, fractured creation at its core, and infected creation at its heart. And now, rather than resounding to God's glory, it's groaning in agony. It's frustrated. It's in bondage. It's decaying. It's trapped in this agonizing cycle where conception and birth are rapidly followed by decline and death and decay. But Paul says, now you need to listen to this groan of creation, Romans 8, closer. Because it's not the groan of death pains, it's the groans of labour pains. There's a world of difference between someone groaning in pain on their deathbed and a mum groaning in pain on a labour ward. And Paul says the groans of creation, because of the resurrection of Jesus, are labour pains. It's good groaning. It's groaning in hope. The whole creation is waiting for new birth. Not just heaven, but a physical new creation. Where Adam's rebellion caused creation to fall, Jesus' resurrection promises creation freedom. where it's been stuck in a cycle where life is swallowed by death, the resurrection promises that death will be swallowed by life. So when you listen to the groans of creation, as you see it in yourself and your friends and your family, as you hear it when you get up the sofa and your back's sore, as you see it on social media or you watch the news, Paul implants within it that because of Jesus' resurrection from the grave physically, there is a hope for this physical world of a new physical world. These are labor pains where we're waiting for something new. Now, Paul then says that groaning in creation is actually linked to the glory that is going to be seen in Christians. Look at verse 23. We'll read to 25. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. For who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. Now, what do Christians have? It says here, we have the first fruits of the Spirit. And that's an important truth to grasp. We have first fruits. First fruits are the promise that there will be more fruit. So as Christians, in this present world, we only have the first fruits of what God has promised to give us. We'll always be a people who are waiting for more fruit, for the final fruit, for the glory of that new creation. We're still waiting for something. That's why Paul says, don't just view your present circumstances. Remember your future glory. This is just first fruits. More's coming. And what is it that's to come? I love this. It is adoption as sons, and it's the redemption of our bodies. Now, the need for those two things are two things that we've been reminded of time and time again in lockdown. We've known a small degree of what it means to have the loneliness of an orphan and the reality of our vulnerable physical lives. Some of us have had hopes dashed of being able to see family at Christmas. This ought to have been the last day of 5 that we spent with family that we've not been allowed to see for ages. Some of us in 2020 have been waiting for surgery or appointments with consultants to help us with something fragile that's been decaying or diseasing our physical bodies. And again, we've had that dashed and delayed because of lockdown. We get the loneliness of an orphan and the fear of physical death. And Paul says, listen, what we are waiting for in the final fruits of our Christian hope is a groaning not just about our present circumstances, but a groaning for the hope of being united with our Heavenly Father and being set free from death forever. Adoption as sons and the redemption of our bodies. And in Jesus we have the hope of both. What happened to Jesus at Easter will happen to all God's people when He comes again. At Easter, Jesus goes from distanced from His Heavenly Father when He cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? To then, when He rises from the dead, to being reunited with His Heavenly Father for eternity. In the cross, He dies physically. But on the third day, He rises physically. For the first time, the curse is reversed. For the first time, the cycle is rewinded. Where life has become death, now death becomes life. And as Christians, because of our trust in Jesus, because we're in Him, our groaning isn't just about our present circumstances. Our groaning becomes waiting for the final fruit of the harvest. Our adoption to sonship where we'll be with our Father, and the redemption of our bodies where we'll be like Jesus' resurrection body. But as we wait for this stuff, and the final thing we're going to say, it's not just that He gives us a future hope that helps us wait in the present. It's that He gives us help in the present as we wait for that future. Listen to these verses in verses 26 to 27. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We don't know what ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. See, there's another groan that comes out of Romans 8. But it's not a groan of creation. It's not even a groan that comes from Christians. It's a groan that comes from God. God groans. It's amazing, right? And it starts with Jesus at Christmas, as God enters his groaning creation, and in Jesus, as he grows, he becomes like us. He groans in hunger, he groans in thirst, he groans in isolation, he groans in pain. He'll then groan in agony as he dies, crucified for us instead of us. But God's groaning isn't just in his Son who enters our life and takes our death. But these verses in Romans 8 says that God groans with us by his Spirit. Beautiful words. He helps my weakness. This is how weak I am. I'm so weak that I can't even verbalize my groans. I can't even sometimes pray in my present suffering. But this tells us that the Spirit comes to groan for us, to help us in our weakness. This is stunning. It's like what we saw last week. God doesn't reject us for our weakness, but he comes to help us in our weakness. God the Spirit groans with me. He groans for me. He takes my groans to God so that God can help me in my weakness. It's not just future hope, but a present help that helps me transform these groans about my present circumstances into groans that are waiting for this future glory. Groans that are like the labour ward that promises new creations coming, or like the farmer who knows the harvest is coming, or like the orphan who knows adoption's coming, or like the patient who knows that healing's coming, with the help of the Spirit, knowing that he knows exactly what we need. How can we keep going? How can we endure? Well, we consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing to the glory that is to be revealed in us, because of what the Father has promised us, because of what the Father has done for us in Jesus, and what he's given to us in his Spirit for our weakness. It was enough for Jesus to endure the cross. It was enough for Paul to endure his suffering. It was enough for the early church to endure a battering. It was enough for our persecuted brothers and sisters around the world to endure their suffering. And for us too, it is in this hope that we have been saved. And the whole point of today is just to say, allow the gospel to turn your groans about present suffering and turn them into groans that lift your eyes for this future glory. Now, if you're not a Christian, you're listening to this, I'd encourage you to do something like look at some of the Gospels, the four biographies of Jesus' life by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And in those you'll see that as Jesus comes, he starts to do miracles that combat the decay in this world. So he cleanses lepers and he heals the paralyzed and he drives out the demon-possessed and he liberates those who have been enslaved and he even raises the dead. All those miracles are just a preview of what he is going to do in his future new creation. He was showing close up in the present what he was promising to do long term in the future. Rescuing people from the corruption and decay of this world as a preview of the renewal of this world. And it's his own resurrection from the dead that sets a pattern. His resurrection life is the hope of our resurrection life. And when you see this in Jesus, who does what no one else has done, it opens your eyes to realize that a different life is possible. That a different ending is possible. You take that first line from Romans chapter 8, verse 18. How would you finish it as someone who wouldn't be a Christian? I consider that my present sufferings are what? Now maybe it's quite trivial and you go, oh, they're an inconvenience to my pursuit of happiness. Or maybe it's stronger than that and you're going, I consider my present sufferings they're too overwhelming that I'm hopeless, or they're too much for me to bear. And maybe they're taking you to this dark place of maybe self-harm, maybe suicide, maybe the sufferings to the point where you wish that euthanasia was available in the UK because you just think it would be nice to have a legit legal way to end it all. Well, I want you to hear this morning that in the life of Jesus and all the miracles that he did, and in the death of Jesus in the place of weak sinners, and in the resurrection of Jesus from the grave, he wants you to consider this morning that in him another life is possible, with the hope that can make you not just groan about your present suffering, but a hope that actually changes your whole way of looking at the world, that you can endure your present suffering because of the guarantee of future hope that he brings. Read that again. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed in us. Don't just groan, but we groan in hope.